Good.
I'm Ryan Brown, and this is the Unvarnished podcast. And today we have the privilege of being at the New York Academy, which is a storied institution, and with Peter Drake, who's the provost. And thank you so much for taking the time. I reached out kind of last minute and tried to pull, all of this together, and you guys were kind enough to, immediately respond and share your time. I know we're taking part of your painting day, which I apologize for, but I appreciate it all the more that you're willing to take the time to talk to us. And I have never visited the New York Academy until today. I have a lot of friends who have come here, friends who teach here, from Jordan Amaya Garapiti to Patricia Watwood, Colleen Berry, I think, teaches here, Stephen Assail. And so I feel like it's been a part of my world for a while, even though it hasn't officially. So, you're nice enough to give us a tour. I can see the artist studios, the students' studios. And I'm just excited to hear more about the school itself, the vision of the school, its history, your role in it, and maybe some about your work, whatever we want to talk about. So,
okay.
Do you maybe start by telling us a little bit about yourself, and then how you came to the school, and then maybe you could give us kind of a brief history of the school itself.
Yeah. As Ryan said, my name is Peter Drake. I'm the provost at the New York Academy of Art, and I have been the provost or dean for the past 11 years. I've been teaching here since 2001, sort of on and off, but I've also taught at Parsons, MICA, SVA, a number of other places. But primarily, I see myself as a working artist, and I think that that's one of the things that was very important to the administration, particularly David Kratz, in hiring me. David actually is an alumnus of the Academy himself, and he was brought on the board as soon as he graduated, and within a couple of years they offered him the position as the president of the New York Academy of Art. And just to give you a little bit of background about the school, it was started back in the early 80s, really by two artists that are a little bit undersung as far as I'm concerned, Barney Hodes and Francis Cunningham. Were teaching at the Brooklyn Museum School and decided to start something that was, I think, the School of Figurative Painting Sculpture, Brooklyn School of Figurative Sculpture, Painting, and Drawing. And eventually, by, I think, 1982 or 3, they decided to form the New York Academy of Art, which has been supported by people like Tom Wolfe and Andy Warhol. Famously, they were both on the board at one time or another, and really felt that the kinds of skills that they were interested in, and people don't think of this when they think of Andy Warhol, but most of his collection really was 19th century salon art. And he was very, very interested in maintaining the kind of teaching that was happening in the 19th century, and felt that most of the major MFA and BFA programs in America were either avoiding that or just removing it from their curriculum. So it was started really more than anything as a kind of drawing club. It was actually free for the first few years. And eventually they moved to a space. It was started actually originally in the basement of a church in the East Village, but it eventually moved to a space on Lafayette that's right next to the Public Theater. It was a beautiful space, had a lot of casts in it. There's actually affiliated with an opera company, which people don't realize too. But by the early 90s, we bought this building and moved everything here and have turned it into a fully accredited by NASAD and Middle States MFA program. We also have an accredited CFA program, a summer undergraduate residency program, and continuing education program. So a lot happens in a single building, but it's a lot that we're really excited by. And just to, I think the school in many ways is very different than ateliers that you can see, and it's also very different from other MFA programs in that we really believe in progressive, figurative, and representational art. We believe in giving people the tools to do the work that they want to do, but we also don't want to repeat the past, and that's very important to us, that it's technical sophistication, but also conceptual awareness. Both those things are equally important to us, and we feel that most MFA programs now focus on the conceptual.
Sorry, can I pause?
Yeah.
I swallowed wrong. I'm going to have. I'm so sorry. You're on such a great track, and I just swallowed. This is not COVID related. It's a poor swallowing method.
Yep, I've done it myself. It's usually when you're talking and breathing at the same time.
Yeah. Sorry.
No problem.
I'm about to have a coughing fit on camera. I'm going to leave those off.
So what I was focusing on is the fact that ateliers tend to focus on the technical side of the coin.
Yeah.
MFA programs, at least in America, tend to focus on the conceptual side of the coin. We felt both those things were equally important, and we wanted to educate our students in a way that they would have the tools that would make it possible for them to pursue their visions, unhindered, basically. That's what it comes down to. So,
when you say we, I didn't realize the New York Academy was so young. I'm thinking, I knew Andy Warhol was involved in it, so I, just kind of, I guess, put that in the 60s and 70s
right.
Era. But when you say we, how did the curriculum evolve? How did that, and how do you continue to refine it? Who's in charge of kind of assessing how things are going, seeing student work, looking at what's going on in the art world and saying, maybe we should add this or take this away, or how did that evolve?
Well, I think it really was more atelier-like in its earliest iteration, but I think over time people realized, and this is because I think the art world in New York, by the time the 80s came around with neo-expressionism and artists like Eric Fischl or later Jenny Saville or Mark Tansey entering the art world and being very prominent, I think it became clear that a level of sophisticated visual articulation was necessary in order to make the kind of work that they were making. They became sort of the role model in a way. So suddenly you had to have both of those sides of the coin. If you're going to do work like Mark Tansey, you have to be informed. You have to know something about critical theory and art history and contemporary history and now, especially right now, there's a lot of focus on contemporary figurative art. So you see people like Shauna McAndrew or Erin Riley or Robin Williams, being at the top of the heap of the art world, and they're figurative, articulate painters, and that actually, I think it started to really shift in the early 2000s because people like Catherine Howe, myself, and Mark Menon were all hired around the same time. And eventually when David became the president, it became very clear that two things had to happen. The school had to rebrand itself because in a sense people thought it was an atelier. And by that time, by 2009, 2010, it had already changed considerably. Yeah. But they wanted the rest of the world, both the academic and the art world, to be more aware of what the Academy was doing and what it had become. And you could see it change in the lecture series. You could see it change by the visiting critics program and the masterclass programs, like how even though the core curriculum remained the same, the kind of work that was coming out of the Academy, the way that the level of sophisticated articulation was being used was very, very different than the inception of the school. Yeah.
And you've always had, it seems, a tie to, because you're talking about, around the era of 2008, 2009, it's starting to shift a little. It seems you've had a really good balance here of consideration of concept, consideration of art making, picture making, and the purpose of art, which is to communicate something. And you've involved some of the academics. So in 2008, 2009, you have the academies, atelier type academies like Florence Academy, Grand Central Atelier, that are becoming far more popular. A lot more students are looking at those as the place to go for skill development. but there's a void, a distinct void at these academies in terms of picture making and concept development, composition, narrative, any kind of multi-figure. And so you've found a way to balance those two worlds here, and in my opinion, are helping students find a personal voice, or you're fostering this individual development far better maybe than some of the academies are doing. And I think that's incredibly positive. That's something that in my school I've tried to do somewhat. We're small enough where we're not having a massive impact on the larger art world, because we're so small, we're isolated in Utah. But here it seems like the New York Academy is having a bigger impact on what's going on in the larger art world because of that focus on the two skill developments. You've included teachers like Jordan Sokol and Amaya Gurpiti and Vincent Desiderio, Stephen Assail, Colleen Berry, and so you have that voice in the conversation from the atelier world, as well as being aware of why people would develop skill, which is the post application of the skill development, which is creating art.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it for me right now is we're seeing our students like Anna Park or Naudeline Pierre or Ali Banassad or Trey Abdella going out into the art world and being shown at Marion Boski or PPOW or Postmasters, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Part of it is just good fortune that the art world has turned and is much more interested in progressive figurative art. If we tried to do the same thing back in the 60s or 70s, it really would have been almost impossible. By the 70s, everything at least in the world of painting was reductive. It was very spare. It was very formalist. It was very academic when it came right down to it.
Yeah.
And you frequently find people referring to the New York Academy of Art as academic, and in fact we are so much the opposite of what's being taught in most MFA programs that if anything we're the exception to the rule. But again, because the art world has changed so much, there's now this interest in having the tools available to you. What you do with those tools is up to you.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's very important, at least from my point of view, is that we don't want to become prescriptive. That, if you are just interested in observational painting, that's entirely up to you. There are plenty of places where you can show observational work and be taken very seriously. But at the same time, if you want to do something that engages, some form of, neo-pop, that's also going to be, up to you. It's we don't tell people what to do with the tools. We just give them the tools.
Yeah.
But again, we expose them to the larger art world and to the ideas that are, important to the larger art world. And I think that's why they can become participants so quickly.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I walk through the halls, I would say, this is completely different than the atelier academic world that I am constantly surrounded by, and I would also say this is completely different than any master's program, except maybe I think Laguna College of Art and Design has a little bit more of a similar bend in terms of their skill development and focus on figure work and more narrative work.
I think you see it at Ringling too, and I think you can see some bits of it at Micah and now at RISD a little bit more, but because I'm seeing students coming from their undergraduate programs and they're better prepared than they used to be. Yeah. You don't have to start from step one.
Yeah. And your inclusion of the atelier teachers, I think, is significant. It's significant to me. I really, again, have a bias. I studied there. I believe in the progressional system that they employ, and so I think the inclusion in that certainly sets you apart because now you're kind of all inclusive. And to do a school like this, to have a building like this, it requires a lot of patronage,
Okay.
and you guys have secured that, and I think that is. I talked to Peter Trippi yesterday, and we talked a little bit about the need for patronage to kind of make the art world go round, and to help support younger artists coming up and developing. Can you talk a little bit about how the Academy supports these artists and through patronage? And I guess I also have a question, and maybe this is separate, but about tuition, because a school like this versus, say, the academies, there's a pretty big difference between the tuition levels. And then coming out and trying to be an artist. I know that's just an issue, a realistic issue that we all have to think about is, how am I going to start this path, and what kind of debt am I going to come out with? I mean, for me, it cost me, over $200,000 to study in Florence, and not just tuition. I mean, I had 3 kids, and we're living internationally, and there's a lot that goes into that number. But these are all real issues. But it seems like maybe the New York Academy is although it might be somewhat expensive, living in New York, the tuition, whatever, it seems like you have some good things in place to help students launch.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things here that are at play. One, we have a very active board of trustees, people that are extremely generous to the school, and to a large extent, that's because David Kratz has brought a lot of really active, really energized trustees onto the board. But also, we run 2 fundraising events per year, and our tuition, even though it's significant, it's right around $40,000 a year at this point, that only covers 60 to 70% of the overall costs of the school. So
Wow.
we have to raise a lot of money every year in order to just keep the boat afloat. And so we have an auction at Sotheby's called Art for Artists, and we get some really prestigious artists donating to the school. There are live and silent auctions, and events like that will bring in a little bit over $1 million a year. We also have Tribeca Ball, which is extremely important to us. That turns the entire school into sort of a carnival like environment. We have exhibitions up on the 5th floor. We have drinks and food and a dinner at the end of the evening. But it's an opportunity to bring the art world into the school and have them walking through all the student studios. And the students get to talk about their work to potential supporters, and it's in some ways it's the first chance that you get to sort of get the feeling of what it's like to be an arts professional in a city like New York, where there is so much support. Trying to do something like that in Cleveland would be a lot harder.
Yeah.
It's not that there isn't a serious art world in Cleveland, it's just that New York has such a deep and deeply invested art supporting community.
Yeah.
So, again, we have to run those things every year. We also have an event called Deck the Walls, which is kind of a Christmas event. Originally was sort of a give back kind of way to just thank our community, but it's also become important to raising funds for scholarships and for just the general maintenance of the program.
Yeah. And you said you do have an undergraduate program?
No, we don't,
No.
and that's unusual. Most MFA programs basically, they don't even have to bring in a lot of money, because the undergraduate program is really where a lot of the money is being made for the school. But we have what we call our Certificate of Fine Arts program, which is a 1-year post-bac program. We also have continuing education courses and a summer undergraduate residency program. And all those things are helping to sort of, like I said, keep the boat afloat, but also bringing new energy into the school. Like the summer undergraduate residency program, for me, it's one of the most entertaining programs at the Academy, because undergraduate students get to come to New York for a month. They get a dormitory at NYU, they get a studio here in the building, they get classes 5 days a week, and then an exhibition at the end of the month.
Wow.
And it's very reasonably priced when you consider what it would cost just to get a hotel room in New York for a month. But it gives them a taste of what it would be like to be an Academy student, because they're studying with our graduates. So the graduates are sort of handing down what they've just learned, and it gives the graduates, their first teaching opportunity for many of them.
Yeah. And what would you say when I was going to Well, I got my undergraduate in illustration and then went to the Florence Academy. Florence Academy was so obvious why I would go there. I just wanted to get better at the basic foundational skills of drawing and painting. And looking at master's degree programs, which I considered for a little while, it seemed to me at the time that the reason I would do it is because I may want to teach at a university. And then I taught at a university, and I thought, I don't want to teach at a university. I just didn't really, for me, I didn't really enjoy the bureaucracy and the meetings, and I wanted to just focus on the art. So what would be the motivator, do you think, for a lot of students in getting their master's degree? Because you have some other programs that don't necessarily focus on the degree element, where you can come and just be a part of the academy and kind of get all the experience. But what would be the general motivator?
I think there's a few things. I mean, teaching, obviously, it is important because it's virtually impossible to get a teaching position these days without a terminal degree. And MFA is right now the terminal degree, although now they're talking about PhD programs for studio art, which seems ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is also getting a community. Like, one of the hardest things for somebody moving to New York to do and to be a part of is to find a community of like-minded artists, to find people that are going to support you, are going to introduce you to their friends, are going to introduce you to their professional connections. So that, when you leave the school, you're not leaving alone. You're leaving with a cohort. And most of our students end up getting, studios together in Bushwick or wherever, and participating in the art world, curating their own shows, writing about art shows. I just see now, if you're going to consider yourself, a real participant in the art world, you have to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
You have to really participate. You do have to be writing. You do have to be curating. You do have to be thinking about, printmaking in addition to your regular studio practice. All those things are important. I always refer to it as having a table with 12 legs. That if one leg gets pulled out, the table still stands.
Right.
Whereas if you've got a table with 3 legs, you're a goner if one leg's gone.
Yeah, it's interesting. I came into my own career with this idea that I'm going to do or die. I'm going to just make a living painting, and I'm going to force that to happen. And for me, I guess it worked just because I thought if I had a part-time job or some other source of income, I'd start to rely on that too much. I probably wouldn't have as much time to paint. I don't know if I would have had the discipline to take the time to paint as often. And so that's kind of the attitude I came to it with is just figure it out. And it was hard for a lot of years. And then I talked to Howard Ray's at Ray's Gallery and a couple of others, and their message to artists is, you don't quit your day job. Don't have to rely on your painting for income, because it'll change what you paint. You're able to be a little bit more
risk-taking.
Risk-taking and true to your vision if you're not so constantly scared of whether or not it's going to sell. And now that I have the benefit of retrospect and some experience, I see that as really valid. And so you're talking about basically kind of both things, having varied sources of revenue, varied avenues that you've got your feet in the art world, and with your major concentration on creating your own art, but making sure that you're varied in how you're participating.
Well, it also, I think, it depends on how you think about the art world, because there are art worlds in Cleveland, Detroit, and Scottsdale, and San Francisco, and LA, and Chicago, and Houston and Dallas. There are art worlds all over the place, but it's difficult to penetrate those without having some kind of showing experience. So the more experience you have, the more likely it is that you'll be able to sort of diversify as far as like having a market is concerned. it gets confusing and it gets to be a little bit weird when you have like too many outlets like that. But I do think for most artists, it's better than focusing on a single marketplace.
Yeah.
But it's funny. Here I am, an artist who's pretty much a full-time administrator. So for the past 10 years, I've been working a full-time job, and prior to that, I was in the studio 6 days a week, and I would teach 1 day a week at Parsons or SVA or wherever else. And the only reason I think that I joined the Academy in this concentrated a way was that David and I shared the same vision for what a great graduate school could do, and what it would mean, and who you'd want to be participating in it. And we were so much on the same page. It was really almost like identical. And he just gave me carte blanche. He's like, you hire the people you think we need to hire, bring in the visiting critics you think we need to have, bring in the professional practice aspect of the program that's been, I think, really revolutionizing for us. And it became for me the first time where I felt there was an institution that I could help shape that could really affect the art world. Like the artists coming out of a program like this now, I think, are going to be at the forefront of the art world for many years to come.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you were talking about students graduating and the community aspect of it. It's a conversation that I've been having for a number of years. I've had this running theory that the art I love, the going through the museums, and I've been fortunate enough to visit a lot of fantastic museums around the world. When I walk through the museums, I want so desperately to feel like what I'm creating is a part of the tradition that I so revere.
Right.
But I think also in my reading and study of biographies of old artists, the theme that keeps popping up is how often they got together, how often they interacted with the express purpose of critical review of each other's work. And in the academic atelier world that I am surrounded by, I don't see that happening nearly enough. And so the museum pieces that I see, to me, almost seem like they're done by committee in a way that, if Alma Tadema, is visiting Sargent, he's going to give feedback on Sargent's work, and Sargent's going to ask for it.
Right.
And they did that regularly. And so when we create works of art, it's a complex machine of problem solving, and you're trying to do solve all your problems as eloquently in a sophisticated manner as you can. But because there's so much to it, in a drawing, painting, sculpture, whatever, you're likely to miss a few things that you could have probably altered or corrected or whatever. And that's where the critical review is so important. It's a system of checks and balances that allows you to be more masterful in what you do.
Yeah.
And I find myself, looking at my work and feeling like I'm capable of more. I just don't have the community to help me get there, which was really the motivation to have a school and to try and basically manufacture that community. And so it seems like that's something that's very important to the Academy, to you, that filters down to the students. And like you say, I think that specifically may be something that lends itself to having these people that are coming out be the leaders of the art world, because they continue with that community, they continue to build each other up.
Well, it's something that I'm really interested in because, if you look at the Impressionists, or you look at the Surrealists, or you look at the Futurists, or you look at the Abstract Expressionists, or the Black Mountain School, or the CalArts Mafia, or the YBAs, all of these groups of artists, they basically entered their art world en masse, right? They had strength in numbers. So it's not just that you're sharing contacts, although that's an important part of it, but in some ways you're also competing with each other. You're
Yeah.
challenging each
Yeah.
other to do more with your work when you've got a community like that. And I
Yeah,
think
you
that-
see someone do something amazing,
Oh,
you're like,
yeah.
oh, okay,
Well,
I got to step my game up.
Well, we were talking about this earlier as we were doing a tour of the studios. Like, it's an open format studio. We don't close doors.
Yeah.
We genuinely believe that some student is going to do something. They'll do work with a new ground, they'll work with a new process, and suddenly you'll see 6 other people doing something along the same lines. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
And that's thrilling to me, because what happens with those 6 people is they don't do exactly what the other person did.
Yeah.
They do their version of it.
Right.
So it starts to expand. So you can
Yeah.
offer somebody the most well-known tools for draftsmanship or perspective or anatomy or painting or sculpture or anything. And you'll give them these tools, and suddenly they'll move off in some strange direction that you couldn't have anticipated, and it's because their own need for individuation comes through. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the most
And the
important.
way they filter the
Yeah.
information that you're giving them, the way they digest it and then put it back out is individual.
Right.
And I think, again, that's so important, because my feeling is that the academic, the atelier, is maybe taking some of that out of the students. They're saying, here's the method.
Right.
Here's what the results are meant to look like.
Right. Don't mess with it.
Yeah, and then all of the praise, you just conversationally, the
Yeah.
day-to-day conversation, all the praise that the students hear goes to the most well-rendered form, or the highly polished still life, or
Right.
whatever. And so just naturally, over the course of a few years being in that environment, you start to adopt this idea that, well, all the praise that I hear is technical, and so all the attention within my environment is going to these particular pieces, and so I got to start to mimic that.
Right.
Some of them have a very distinct method, and so it's step 1, step 2, step 3, and this is the outcome that you're aiming at.
Yeah.
And the individuality is handicapped, or in some cases it feels like it's just crushed.
Yeah.
by no attention being paid to it, or consideration for it.
I always think it's funny when you go to the websites for some of the ateliers and you look at student work, and you'll be like, wow, that's amazingly well rendered, but I can't tell one student from the
Yeah,
next.
who
They
did
look
it?
so similar.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what is your voice then? Like,
Yeah.
how can that possibly be missing?
Right.
And still feel like you're being creative? It
Yeah.
just feels like, no, you're just replicating something that has been done for over 100 years. But the same thing happens in conceptual schools too.
Sure,
Suddenly
sure.
you find that there is a way of being lauded by your faculty and peers, and there's a tendency to just reproduce that too. So
Yeah, and I think that's timeless. I think I've read critics from the 19th century, people that have gone through the older academies that have talked about, for every 1,000 graduates, there'll be one that has something to say, and the rest will be copyists.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the nature of things, right? I mean, whether you're going to music school or dance school, having unique voice and something to say, and your own stylistic bend is not the average. It's not the common. It's the standouts that end up doing that, and that's going to happen no matter. If I go to the academy and have that inclination anyway, the academy's not going to crush it out of me.
Right.
But I do think there's an important element. I do believe that it's twofold. That there is a systemic issue where the system itself has to at least have it within their conversation and daily vernacular, so that students are aware of it. And then there's an individual responsibility among the students where they have to demand it of themselves. And that's the part that, as much as I tried to change the system at my own school, which is the Masters Academy of Art, I couldn't offset the individual effort. So if students weren't going home and making their own paintings, if they weren't attempting to follow some of these concepts and ideas that they had, I couldn't make up for that lack of effort.
Yeah.
And so I do believe it kind of falls on both, but I don't know that the academies right now are adjusting their systems to fulfill their responsibility, their role in that development.
You know, I may be sort of stepping away from the particular issue that you're bringing up, but I do feel like even though at the top of the pyramid of the art world, there's probably just, 100 artists that are, the auction house, dear darlings, whatever.
Yeah.
And they're probably supported by an equal number of very wealthy people who are on the boards of the major museums and are the backers of the major galleries, and they're all sort of keeping this game afloat by never letting the prices drop beyond a certain point. But I do also believe that you can participate in the art world without necessarily being at the top of the pyramid.
Sure.
That there are many different art worlds out there, and I think most artists that find a way to survive as a creative person are actually, I refer to it as sort of contributing to the hive. We as a community, as a larger community, are all participants and are all shaping that community in any number of ways. And like I've said, it could be through writing, or it could be through curating, or it could be through education, or it could be through showing at smaller galleries, or organizing salons, in your studio and with your peers and your cohorts. So it's like, people get so fixated on one aspect of the art world, which actually is a very small aspect of the art world.
Yeah.
It's a very moneyed aspect of the art world, but there are, like I said, almost like an infinite number of art worlds out there for you to participate in.
And that, I think, maybe speaks to, another issue that I find is very important to talk to students about, and that is what their idea of success means. Because if you want to be rich and famous in the art world, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But there's certain decisions you have to make and certain paths you have to go down to achieve that, and you need to be very true to yourself in terms of what motivates you. If it's the craft of it, which again, I'm coming from the academic atelier world. A lot of people are genuinely motivated by just great execution.
Right.
That's totally fine. You just have to be very clear about what you're aiming at, and then understand that if you spend more time here, you have less time here.
Yeah.
If you spend more time marketing, you may spend less time in the studio. If you spend more time just pounding your head against the canvas, you may spend less time marketing. And if you find less monetary success because you're in the studio all the time, at least that's a deliberate choice.
Right.
And I think that it's hard to have everything. It's hard to be a Jeff Koons and still be painting 12 hours a day, right? But if you're very honest with yourself and say, this is important to me, then you can start to prioritize everything that would have to go into that, and then I think you find some satisfaction based on the fact that you made a deliberate choice.
Yeah. It's funny, just the professional practice aspect of things. Back in the late 90s, there were a couple of foundations that they looked at most art programs, and they saw that very few people who were graduating with MFAs were succeeding in the art world. They couldn't sustain their careers. And they were really bothered by that, because they felt like most art studios are actually small businesses, and that they should be trained as small businesses. Right. To survive. And so they funded Columbia, Parsons, SAIC, RISD, I think, and MICA to develop professional practice programs. And this was largely sort of filtered through the New York NYFA, New York Foundation for the Arts. And at first, there was so much resistance from faculty, because the model for most schools at the time was the ivory tower. Like, you're not supposed to talk about survival. You're not supposed to talk about the marketplace. You don't even, if you do, you're seen as corrupted somehow.
Yeah.
And gradually, over time, most programs now have some kind of professional practice in it, because they realize it does work. It gives you the tools to survive, whether it's applying for residencies or applying for grants or applying for public, commissions or private commissions or working with designers and architects instead of galleries. It gives you other ways of surviving. And I think that's been a huge shift for most schools, because this is what I believe personally, we're not trying to protect our students from the art world, we're trying to prepare them for the art world. And that's a seismic shift, I think.
Yeah.
And it's important. It doesn't mean that you're hyper-professionalizing people, you're just teaching them survival skills.
Right. If you're going to do this and you want it to be your profession, it's not just the skills and the art making aspect of it, which I would say most schools are concerned with, which is not an invalid concern.
Sure.
But you are a small business owner at that point, and it just isn't. It isn't discussed generally, and I mean that's a big thing that you have to kind of clumsily fight for the knowledge.
Right.
And
that's what you end up doing. You end up teaching yourself by failing.
Yeah.
It's like you have to fall on your face so many times and sort of humiliate yourself by trying to figure out how to survive.
And a lot of people don't make it to the other side.
And
a lot of very skilled, very highly motivated, brilliant people don't make it to the other side because it's really, really difficult, and you can only sustain so many failures before you just. I mean, life forces you to maybe find some more stability, and that's incredibly unfortunate.
Yeah. It's funny, we were talking about Joseph Brickey earlier, and one of the things I remember talking to him about, I was like, well, what art world do you want to participate in? Because he was doing a lot of religious imagery, and he said, I want to work, for my Mormon community, and I'll be making religious paintings. And I was like, good for you, dude. You know exactly what you want to do. You know exactly what your audience is. You know that it's an audience that's going to support you. Yeah. So go for it. It's like
then there's the organization of the church has deep pockets, and they're supporting the arts. They're commissioning things, and there's an outlet. He had a focus and an outlet, and that's significant.
That may not be your outlet or my outlet, but it's like he knew what he wanted to do, and he wasn't embarrassed by it, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Even the other people are trying to convince him to think more like a contemporary artist or whatever. Yeah, that just wasn't his route. He had a different route.
Yeah, and that leads me to another question I talked to Peter Trippi a little bit about. I thought about this because, one of my heroes is Burton Silverman, really the guy who made me want to be a painter in the first place. And unfortunately, with COVID, I wasn't able to visit his studio or have a discussion with him, hopefully in the future. But I did get a chance to talk to Max Ginsberg, who is, of that generation, and doing very similar things in terms of painting very representationally, painting daily life on top of social issues. And my question to Peter, and my question just in general, I wonder about all the time, is there does seem to be, although it seems that the art world in general, even the contemporary art world, is coming back to the figure, and the more representation is starting to find its way into a world that used to completely shun it. It seems like a lot of it almost demands an oddity or a brutality or a deliberate obscurity to it in order to be broadly and largely accepted at a very high level. And I wonder, with Burton Silverman, he never kind of hit that, or Max Ginsberg or Harvey Dinnerstein or any of those guys, never quite hit that upper echelon of recognition like an Odd Nerdrum or a Jenny Saville or Lucian Freud, John Curran. And I wonder, is it too accessible? Does it require the deliberate obscurity in order to, because I think people think about that as they're trying to figure out their careers and what to paint. I have way too many ideas that I could pursue, And so when I'm on a daily basis choosing which ideas are the most significant, you do have to consider the audience and whether or not it's going to be accepted, whether or not it's going to be accepted at a higher level. I mean, I live in the West, so the Western market is massive, and the temptation to dive into it.
Cowboy Association of America.
Right. I mean,
CAA.
it's
huge.
And I grew up on my grandfather gave me his Louis L'Amour collection, so I love the stories. I love the Old West, and I love Native American culture, and but it's not necessarily the world I live in, and so but I know that there's a market. And I know that I live in an area where if I painted it, it wouldn't be too weird because I live there.
Yeah.
I have friends that are Native American.
Well, and you've done some landscapes that are very much about the Southwest.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've visited these places. I've spent time. I've plein air painted. I've spent a lot of time there, and so it wouldn't be out of context for me to do that. Except my interest genuinely is
not that.
Yeah, not necessarily that. But it's a temptation. It's something I have to consider as a working artist that makes my living from painting.
And having 5 kids.
Right, and having, absolutely. And I think when we're talking about business, that has to come into play. It certainly is a factor that we have to consider as artists, is what is the outlet, and how do I sustain myself, and how do I get recognition. The recognition is important because we are painting for other people.
Yeah.
It's not, we don't just paint and hide it in a closet. We are doing this for public consumption.
Yeah.
So living in New York, be involved with the New York Academy, what is your thoughts on that in terms of, sorry, it's a really convoluted question, but the Burton Silvermans or even a Jacob Collins who does more straightforward observational work versus a Lucian Freud or Bo Bartlett or whoever. Do you feel like that the more straightforward, the more accessible, easily legible work will ever break through to that level of recognition?
Lucian Freud certainly, never had, it seems like a down moment in his career.
Yeah.
I mean, he managed to find a way to create an audience for work that was highly skilled, largely observational, especially in his later work. But I see that as more the exception to the rule. I mean, it's very hard to do that because people will see it as not having an edge. There's an edge in his work because the kinds of figures that he was interested in painting, so there was sort of a different worldview there. Bo certainly is surviving and does well. People like Steve Assail definitely have an audience, but are they going to be taken seriously by the critical community? Probably not. Not to the degree that a Jenny Savile or Mark Tansey or some of the artists like Alison Elizabeth Taylor that's in the show that I've curated at the school here, or Aaron Riley or Derek Adams. The one big difference that I would say that has happened in the last 10 years or so is that, let's say you take a period like the Neo-Expressionist period in the 80s, the people that were being taken most seriously, like George Baselet, somebody like that, had to de-skill in order to be taken seriously, because the idea was that authenticity only came from the outsider, somebody who wasn't trained, somebody who didn't have the sophistication of the Western canon behind them. So it was almost brutalist on a certain level. And the younger artists that were also surviving at that time and doing well were largely de-skilling to a certain extent. I did that myself. I mean, I felt like, okay, well, I've got to find some authenticity in distortion, or referring to, in my case, I was looking at 15th century Sienese painters. But a lot of it was about not exercising my natural talent. If anything, it was denying my natural talent.
Right.
And at a certain point, I was just like, you know what, I'm just sick of this. This feels completely insincere. Even though I was doing quite well with it, I wanted to go a different direction. I wanted to use skill as a way to engage people who might otherwise not be engaged. And so there's something about the way that skill can actually attract, in some ways, a larger audience, because there are there are points of entry that are different. There's the fascination with illusionism. There's the fascination with art history, that other people can see. You can definitely use that language to do something that's more challenging and may have, either social issues or personal issues or political issues that you want to address through your work. They just sort of come in a back door. They come in as sort of secretly, almost.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting to me because as someone, who, for me, the Musée d'Orsay is my mecca. It's the L'Ermite and Bastien Lepage and Waterhouse. I mean, these are the gods of painting to me, and particularly because it is accessible. Particularly because the Peter Monsteds and the Ivan Shishkins, and I mean I don't have to rattle them off for you, but the naturalists to me. Are the best painters in history. I think from a skill standpoint, from a narrative standpoint, this is the world I'd like to pretend to be a part of.
Right.
At least pretending now, I hope I can actually develop to a point where I feel like I might belong. But I don't know if it'll ever have that larger acceptance, unless, of course, subject matter-wise, it finds a massive market like the Western market has become, which I don't necessarily see myself going towards. But it's a scary reality to know. But like you said, there's all kinds of different levels. There's always going to be the blue chip people that are rare. That's rarefied air. You don't. If you get there, great. But the majority of us kind of exist in the middle and still find an audience to appreciate it and create significant work that has a large enough audience that you can survive and even thrive to a degree. So,
well, it's funny, when we passed by Jed Smith's studio earlier today, the guy who was doing this sort of singing cowboy kind of watercolors. One of the things that I really like about Jed's work, and if there were more pieces in his studio, you would have had more of a sense of that, but he's using the tropes of the Western cowboy painting to talk about social issues, but they're kind of hidden in a strange way. But he's doing very well. He's got a gallery, Poulsen Gallery in Denmark, that's going to be giving him a solo show, and maybe that's not the top of the art pyramid, but it's a young artist who, while he's still studying, is getting professional connections, and it's highly, highly visually articulate work.
Yeah.
So there is room in the art world, and I think the art world that we're interested in now is one that is interested in this sophisticated level of articulation, but also where you see the artist's personal vision, where you see that they are not just replicating the past.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting time right now because the art world always changes. It's not going to be like this in another 10 years. There's going to be something else that'll come along because the art world as a kind of business needs new product all the time. It can't just support the same people or the same ideas over and over again. Yeah. So you constantly see things swinging back and forth. And, you just have to prepare yourself. Just in the time that I've been, participating in the art world, showing the art world, I've seen, probably 3 movements.
Yeah.
I mean, that's inside of 30, 40 years.
Right.
It's really bizarre.
It seems like it potentially could even speed up now because, our attention span is so short, getting shorter and shorter, and accessibility to imagery has grown exponentially. We can see so many artists in the palm of our hand, which means we're exposed to so many various ideas, and how that affects us is significant. I guess we could maybe wrap up, as we were talking about the future, or whatever. But it's pretty easy to check into the New York Academy to apply. Yeah, you have to have an undergraduate.
You have to have a degree. So we have people that come as scientists and doctors and lawyers. David's degrees were in law, David Kratz, and he got his master's degree. We've had people who come from certificate programs. We've had people come directly from high school into our certificate program and then enter the master's program. So yeah, our website has all the information you could possibly want.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite things to do, is just to do portfolio reviews
Yeah.
of potential students. So if somebody just wants to have their work reviewed by our admissions director, Noel Timmons, or me, it's easy. Just make an appointment.
Yeah.
It's one of the most entertaining. I had a portfolio review with a woman a couple of days ago. It was supposed to be 20 minutes and it lasted 60 minutes. We just kept talking about our work because it was just so much fun.
Yeah.
So
it's very impressive that you're so accessible. That the people, we reached out to David, who put us in touch with you, and it was just immediate responses. Which again, it's so impressive because coming from the outside, never having visited here, you don't have to give me 2 seconds of your time, and you're so generous. You both of you were just so generous and immediate in your response to give us time. That's so impressive to me because I've reached out to plenty of other people wanting to talk to them, have a simple conversation, try to put a little bit of a spotlight on them, and it's impossible to get a hold of some people. And so for an institution like this, to have people like you that are accessible and care so much to share your time is amazing to me. So thank you so much.
I always say this to people that, even though the instructors and the students at the academy may not all be on the same page, they're definitely in the same book. That you go to most schools and it's like, oh, you've got one person who's doing installation, another person's doing video, one person's doing formalist abstraction, another person's doing neo-expressionist painting, and it's like it's all over the map, and there's almost no sense of mission or identity, whereas this school has a very clearly defined mission, and it's something that we all believe in. We believe in it passionately. It's so unlike any other school that I've been a part of, in that that mission is so shared. It's something that you get excited about. When I see a student, and this is so amazing, I've seen a number of students come in at the low end of the technical spectrum, right? And then all of a sudden, something clicks, some light goes off, and they get it, and they start rendering really beautifully, and then they start to apply that rendering ability to their own ideas, and then it's like you can go from being what seems to be one of the weakest portfolios to being one of the most likely to succeed in the art world inside of 1-2 years. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, I think with people like you heading it up, and the generosity you exhibit with your time and your passion for it, I think that, to me, if I were visiting schools trying to figure out where to go, that's the seller. It's not just a cold institution where you're going to get some skill and whatever, but you're surrounded by people that really genuinely care. And so that's something I appreciate more than anything, is seeing people at the head.
Can I say one other thing about this? It's funny that you put it that way, because I feel like for me, because I visit a lot of the classes just to sort of get a feeling of what people are working on and how they're developing, and it's one of my favorite things to do. But it's funny because I feel like I could go to this school and take a class with any one of our instructors, and I would benefit enormously. Even though I've been painting since I was 7 years old, and I've been showing for the past 40 years, I could still learn something from every one of our faculty members, because they're that good.
Right.
And I love it. I walk into a class and I'll see Roberto Asti doing, a demonstration of anatomical drawing. I'll be, damn, I wish I could take his class. I would just like to take every one of the classes in the school.
Yeah, just be a perpetual student.
Right.
For me, being a student was the most magical time, because all of the concerns about shipping paintings off and framing and all of the professional stuff we have to go through, that was all gone, and I could just concentrate on getting better. It was magical. Well, thank you again. Do you want to tell people where they can find your work?
I show with Craig Head Green in Dallas right now, a show with Linda Warren Projects in Chicago, and I've don't have anything planned in the immediate future, but I've got some work that's up in Dallas now at Craighead Green. So if you're in the Dallas area, stop by and say hello.
Yeah, and your website is?
Actually, my website sucks right now, so better to go to Instagram.
Okay.
Peter Drake Art.
Peter Drake Art on Instagram. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you again for taking the time.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate
really
it.
Fun, nice conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
And I love your work too. I mean, it's really impressive. And next time you come back here, we have to have you do a master class or something.
Yeah, that'd be
like
fun.
that.
That'd be really fun.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right.
Okay, it's a wrap.
All right.